Hey guys, welcome back to Learn Python the Hard Way. In this exercise 8, we're going to focus on printing. And we're going to see a more complicated formatting of a string. So let's get started by typing in the code and then executing it. So again, I opened my terminal, which if you're on a Mac, you can open by pressing Command and Space key and then typing in terminal. Now within the terminal, we can navigate to the right folder and take a look at the previous videos if you are unsure how to do that. So once we are inside of that folder, we can create a new file. We can do that by entering the touch command and then followed by the name of the file, which should end in py for Python. Once we have created that, we can type in ls to show the files, and then we can open the newly created file in our text editor. So I'm using Visual Studio Code, so I can just type in code for Visual Studio Code, followed by the name of the Python file. And instead of using the touch command first, you could also directly type in code, followed by the file name. That would then immediately create a new Python file. So let's press enter, and this is going to open Visual Studio Code, and we can type the code in here. So let's get started by defining a formatter, and this is going to be a string, which we can see because we have two quotation marks, and then within that we are going to type in open curly braces, closed curly braces, and we can repeat that 3 more times. So we have 4 different curly braces within those quotation marks. Next, we are going to type in a print statement. And inside of the print statement, we are going to type formatter, which is the variable we defined previously, and dot format, which we already saw before, that if you use the format command, then we can basically insert variables inside of a string. So here we're going to open the curly braces, or the parentheses rather, and type in the numbers 1 through 4. Now what's going to happen once we execute this is that we take the formatter string, which has actually those 4 placeholders inside of it, which start with an open curly brace and then a closed curly brace. And by calling format on that particular string, we are going to format any of those places where we have opened and closed curly braces, and we are going to replace any of those spots with one of the variables that we enter after it. So in this case, the numbers of 1 through 4. So this should actually print out 1 space 2 space 3 space 4. Next, we're going to type in print, followed by a formatter again. And this time we're going to format it, but we're going to insert the variable 1, excuse me, not the variable, the string 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now in here, a similar thing is going to happen, so we are going to call the formatter string, and instead of inserting the numbers 1 through 4, we're going to insert the strings 1, 2, 3, 4, which should be separated with a space. Next, let's print out formatter.format, and here we type in true, false, false, true. So these are Boolean expressions, and this again should be replaced within the string here. Next, we're going to type in print, again formatter, let me type that correctly, dot format. And now we're gonna actually enter formatter, so which again is actually that placeholder itself, that variable itself, and we're gonna type that in 4 times. Now what should happen here is that again we are taking that formatter string, and within those curly braces we're going to replace any of those expressions with one of these values that we enter afterwards. Since we enter formatter again, actually in place of these two curly braces, we should insert 4 additional curly braces that are separated by a space. So actually this should print a total of 16 of those curly braces here. Let's check that out in a moment, but before we do that, let's add one additional print statement here. So formatter.format, and here we type in try your, comma, own text here, comma, maybe a poem, comma, or a song about fear. Right. So here now we do a similar thing. We insert 4 different strings, so it's kind of comparable to the second step here, but this time we are formatting it a little bit different. In this case, we are writing it in multiple rows, not in a single row as we did here, but we are still separating it by commas. So what should happen here is that actually we still print out formatter and then followed by try your in the first curly braces, then a space followed by own text here, followed by space, and then maybe a poem, another space, and then finally or a song about fear. And that should actually be printed out in a single row. So let's save this for now. Open the terminal here. Just going to clear it by pressing Ctrl and L, and then we can type in Python 3. We can actually type in Python 3.6 or Python 3, that doesn't really matter, followed by the name of the exercise. So exercise 8, and let's press enter. And now let's compare that to the solution here. And let me just move this down a little bit so we can compare to what we typed in here. So in the first case here, we see 1, 2, 3, 4, which is basically what we expected because we are taking the formatter variable here, and each of those curly braces is then replaced with one of those numbers here. And as we do that, actually those numbers here, which are digits, are then turned into a string themselves and are printed out. In the next case, we just have the numbers 1 through 4, which again are inserted in here into those curly braces and are basically replaced here. The same happens for those 4 Boolean expressions, true, false, false, true. They again are printed out and are basically replaced here for those curly braces. And then we have this case here where we actually pass formatter into formatter itself. And then as expected, we have 4 separate curly braces for each of those curly braces here, because each of those spots here basically is replaced by, again, 4 of those entries. So there will be a total of 16 of those curly braces. And then finally, we have this call here where we actually use that print statement across multiple rows. And we have the text in here, the variables that we pass in, the strings, and they are then placed in those 4 spots here. It's actually all printed out in a single row, so it doesn't really matter if we actually type that in a single row, comma separated, or if we type that into multiple rows, and so it's basically ignored once it's executed. So that's looking good. Now let's take a look at the exercise description here. So what we do here is that we are using a function to turn the formatter variable, which we defined here at the beginning, into other strings. And when we are typing in formatter.format, which we're doing here, for example, and also in those other 4 cases, we're telling Python the following. We're taking the formatter string, which is defined in the first line, and we call the format function on it by using .format, which is similar to telling it to do a command line command named format. And then we pass those 4 arguments into that formatter, and actually into that format function here. And we allocate that basically to the formatter variable. So that will match up the 4 open closed curly braces in the formatter variable, and then this is going to pass the arguments to the command line command format. And the result of calling format on formatter is a new string that has the open closed curly braces replaced with the 4 variables. This is what print is printing out. And this is basically what we see in the terminal here. So that's quite a bit here, but we worked through the variables, we set up those print statements, and we used the format function that we called onto the formatter variable, passing in those different arguments to basically format what we print out. And that can be quite useful going forward to replace particular entries and pass variables into a string that we are working with. So that's it for exercise 8, and I'll see you guys next time focusing on exercise 9.